Welcome to PokeChuck, where passion meets Pokemon. From market moves to vintage vibes, we break down the hobby, the hype, and the heat. Let's dive in. All right, guys. Today we are going to be looking at this article that was written by ChatGPT a day ago. We're going to be talking about my own thoughts as to what we can expect in the Pokemon speculative hobby. This article claims that we are in a giant speculative bubble with intense market corrections coming soon. I don't generally agree with that. I want to talk about some of the points that were made here because I think a lot of them were cherry picked, and I think some very bold comparisons were made without a lot of substance. That's not to say that there isn't value in this. I think there are some decent points, especially when it comes to cards and slabs, which are typically more volatile. But we already know that. We can expect that. So I just want to break this down a little bit, give my thoughts as to where I think we're potentially heading for the rest of the year, and just keep the thought fresh in mind as to having a good plan regardless of the circumstance. Now, how do I actually think a correction could happen to this, to this level? We're talking about a crash and comparing it to the .com era. I think the only way that's possible is if there's like a massive economic recession mixed in with like a global black swan event, wars, which who knows. It would have to be pretty drastic. It would have to be like completely like shake the reality that we live in to its core for something like a booster box to completely crash, given the information that we know about where the IP stands and where demand is. Something I definitely agree with is that demand is far outpacing supply. We know that, more so than the last cycle. More so than the last cycle. But I actually think that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's probably a good thing for the hobby because it means it's continuing to grow. Pokemon is putting out good set after good set, regardless of what you think. That's what most people think. And I think it'll be an interesting time over the next year to see where the market moves. But we do know that summers topics like this, the vibes, what people are doing, going on vacation, going to out of school, all of these things, right? There's always a lull in the market, and that's also true in the stock market. It can often be true in crypto. People are more focused on living their lives, typically. So to start, they used cards to represent the market. Red flag number one. We're using these are the 5 metrics. So we're looking at 2 vintage sets. We're looking at a few raw modern cards, some slabs, ETBs, and booster boxes for quote unquote the new hype sets, I guess. So starting out by comparing growth rates from 2023 to 2024 to 2024 to 2025. Really, it's just the delta between the growth rates for each of the 5 categories that were mentioned. Quite simply, the market was in a more of a lull from 2023 to 2024 compared to 2024 to 2025. That's really all that means. And this is the difference between those 2 years amongst these 5 things. So that's posted here. So to start, we're talking about vintage. Modern slab sealed product have skyrocketed. Vintage, like base and Team Rocket, have showed a more modest price increase, which is true. There is more hype in ultra modern and modern right now because that is where a lot of the hype is. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That just means that the hobby and the Pokemon Company, they are pumping out really, really good sets. Quite frankly, sets that are better, in my opinion, than a lot of these sets in the vintage era. Evolving Skies, I think personally is the best set ever made. It's a little bit older, I understand, but it is one of the sets listed. So yeah, we saw a 55% increase in from 2023 to 2024, and then a 30% increase from there. And I think a big part of that is because there is more hype in Modern. That is true. I think it's a fair point to make. But also, these boxes are like $20,000 or higher. You know what I mean? Like, there are going to be a lot less buyers buying them, so they're a lot more illiquid. And we know that a lot of the hype in the last era was on vintage and less so on modern, because modern sucked for the most part. The best set that we had was Vivid Voltage. And quite frankly, a lot of people are priced out of sets that are $20,000, and that's totally understandable. However, they are still being bought. A 30% increase is, that's still indicative of a really strong market. So same with Team Rocket, 11% that year, 45% the year after. I'm not really understanding the point that's being made here, saying that because vintage is growing at a slower pace, that's a bad thing. We had a higher percentage of growth in the years during COVID. The boxes are more expensive. Growth is going to slow down typically as price increases because it's all relative. If a box is $250,000, you're not going to have that many sales of it every single year compared to something that's $300, right? We have more investors, more collectors in the hobby than ever before. And a lot of them got into Scarlet and Violet because it's a really strong era. Really strong era. 151, Paldean Fates. Sets like Paldea Evolved or Surging Sparks. Twilight Masquerade even. These are really accessible to collectors, and there's a lot to love. I think the IRs are... Personally, I like SIRs, but to collectors right now and this entire era, IRs are one of the most successful... I'm not going to call it a gimmick because there's not a mechanic or anything, but just addition to the hobby. Investors like better pull rates, or not investors, collectors like better pull rates, and they like more arts and getting the dopamine rush of pulling something in more packs compared to something like Sword and Shield. Modern ungraded. Let's move on to this. The numbers don't lie. They're experiencing growth rates that are completely out of line with historical trends. Stamp Pikachu, Gray Hat Pikachu exploded last year with previous growth 176, and now in the last year, in 2024, 2025, 355%. It isn't organic. It's a classic symptom of FOMO and speculative hype. But what does that mean? What does that mean? Is it not organic? I mean, pretty much everybody likes Gray Hat Pikachu. You know what I mean? FOMO and speculative hype. Yeah, I mean, speculative hype is literally what this hobby is, essentially, from an investing standpoint. It's purely speculative. There's not a balance sheet that talks about cards or booster box performance. They're not generating revenue for shareholders. They're just art that people buy because the IP is popular. But the thing is, with these cards, I think more of them were available in 2023, 2024. The pop counts are really high, but they're not making them anymore, and people want them. And so there was a lot of money flowing into cards like these. So, they're not purchasing based on long-term value. They're chasing momentum. I mean, partially true, but also they kind of are. A lot of people are purchasing for long-term value. They're also purchasing the cards because they like them. Many of them. Investing is a big part of this space, but there's a lot more collectors, and there's a lot more hype. So I don't fully disagree, but I just don't really see the point. Puts Modern ungraded in a precarious position. When growth gets this aggressive, a pullback is not just possible, it's expected. currently the most vulnerable segment of the market. That's always been the case. Raw cards are always the most vulnerable. That's understandable. This is starting to look like the Pokemon version of the .com bubble. Just like tech stocks in the late 90s, modern cards are being driven by, not by collector fundamentals, but by hype, speculation, and FOMO. I don't think that's a comparison that can be made, because the tech bubble, the .com bubble, these were companies that had no assets, nothing behind them, and were essentially giving false promises and spiking in value. And then once it popped, there was no value. But the difference is that with Pokemon, the value is understood. It's pure speculation. It is pure hype. People like Pokemon. It is the #1 IP in the world by far. And the Pokemon TCG market continues to grow. There's literally a trading card game. I don't know if people have forgotten that. That drives these fundamentals. Sets come in rotation, they come out of rotation. And to compare it to tech stocks in the late 90s with like no history of like ever being a company for the most part, Pokemon has 30 years of success in the trading card space. So, you know, it doesn't make any sense. Growth rates being 150 to 350% in a single year aren't sustainable. Now, that's true. I do agree. We cannot grow at 200% a year forever. Demand is, it's quite simple. Demand is outpacing supply. And when the excitement fades, the prices will too. I'm not sure that's true for sealed. I know we're talking about cards, but the Pokemon company stops printing product at a certain point, right? The whole mechanic is that they print boxes for a few years and then they stop because they're moving on to new sets for the card game. And that's the biggest difference between comparing sealed product to tech stocks. It's quite simply supply and demand is outpacing supply at the moment by a very high rate. That's not to say that ungraded cards are safer. Obviously, as more product gets ripped, there will be more cards. 2023, 2024, $281 to $338, right? Lower growth rate compared to last year. I get it. The same is true for all of these top chase cards, but that's also there are plenty of other cards and Sword and Shield, Scarlet and Violet that have seen a modest price increase over time. Some have even gone down, right? Scarlet and Violet. Pretty much every top chase card has declined. We understand that. But as sets continue to dwindle in supply, oftentimes when there's a strong chase card, those increase in price. And I think that's a big part of it. Now there's a lot of hype. But Moonbreon, Giratina have been getting hyped for years now. So, and Gengar as well. So, yeah, prices are increasing for high demand cards. Demand is really high, so money is flowing into the popular chase cards of these eras. That doesn't mean that like we're in some speculative bubble that's going to crash. Not to mention liquidity is like one of the things that keeps Pokemon crash resistant. It's a lot harder to sell things than it is to buy. Modern slabs and PSA 10, similar story. Parabolic territory. We have high prices, high price increases. Look, it's no secret cards are a lot more volatile than sealed product because of the simple supply versus demand. More cards are in circulation basically with every day that passes for a few years until there's no sealed product left. Yeah, but I expect a card like Mewtwo to continue to grow because there's not a ton of sealed product left for this set. Will it grow at 200%? Probably not. But this is an unprecedented year of growth, which I guess is the point that's being made here. I don't see how that relates to a bubble. That's my point mainly. ETBs. So this is kind of more our territory. Now we're talking about sealed product. Traditionally a lower risk sealed product. Prices typically lower for ETBs. But in the last year, we have seen more money flow into ETBs, partially because I think booster boxes are more expensive than they were. ETBs are more available, right? They're printed more than a booster box. 200, 400%. Yep. Sealed product appreciates slowly and steadily, often driven by rarity or nostalgia. Fair enough. ETB is broken out of that pattern, pointing to short-term flipping behavior and speculative hype. Now, I think part of that's true, but you're also leaving out a lot of factors as to why they go up in price. Evolving Skies, I think it's a set that was always going to be increasing, and it's a set that's like 4 years old at this point. The supply continues to dwindle. Again, we had a much more of a lull in the Pokemon market during this time. Pokemon Pocket has brought in so many new investors. Twilight Masquerade, Surging Sparks. People love Scarlet and Violet. And so a lot of money flowed into, in my opinion, the best set of all time. Evolving Skies is a bit of an outlier. And also, they look great to display. PCTVs, same story. 151 is interesting because this is a set that is relatively new. It is not quite 2 years old yet. But even when it first came out, it was still well-loved and still relatively popular. Of course, it was easier to find product. But that doesn't mean it wasn't getting purchased. It just means it was being purchased at a slower rate. But to say that they're just breaking out of a pattern pointing to short flipping behavior and speculative hype and leaving it there is, you're not telling a full story. The Pokemon Company did not print more ETBs for 151. And so, of course, the price is going to increase because it's a really popular set. Same with Paldean Fates, the exact same story. They came in high, they dropped, and then they stayed that price for the longest time. Went up to like $50, and now they're pushing $200 or $200. Are they that high? It doesn't matter. Whatever. 140 plus, right? Hidden Fates, much older set. Still a decent amount of supply on the market. But again, like, we can expect relatively large jumps in sealed product with this many years that have passed for sets like Hidden Fates, a set that's really popular. A lot of speculation on the set, to be fair, with the stained glass birds, but I don't think 135% jump over 2 years is bubble territory per se. So, these are really, really strong sets. The Pokemon Company literally cannot print to demand. And the argument is that as the years go by, as the months go by, sets like 151 and Paldean Fates might completely miss the reprints from the era. Because now we have Megas coming out. We have all the sets that came out afterwards. These are factors that we need to consider as well. It's not simply just short-term flipping behavior and speculative hype. And leaving it there. Booster boxes, kind of the same argument. Fusion Strike, Paldean Team Up have shown year-over-year price. Classic signs of speculative buying. The prices are not climbing steadily, they're spiking, which is true, and but that's usually the case. Usually booster boxes kind of remain flat and then they spike. They leg up and then they remain flat and then they spike. That is the case now. It is more intense because there are like multiples of more people in the hobby pushing up product, or buying product, I should say. Well, sealed product sees this level of demand volatility and products with large print runs like Fusion. It's not sustainable. Fair enough. Okay. As hype cools or liquidity dries up, many of these booster boxes will likely retrace hard. leaving only those who got in late holding overvalued product. That can be true, but they're not making more Fusion Strike booster boxes. They're not making more Evolving Skies booster boxes. Same with Team Up, same with Evolutions. Probably Evolved, arguably, they're not making more booster boxes for that either, more than likely. We'll see what happens. But more are being ripped, not more. There isn't an increase of supply entering the market. They're harder to sell than something like crypto or a stock. And as every month that passes, more and more sell, and prices for Evolving and Fusion, they get more accepted. And that's what we always see. You know, Fusion for 740 or Evolving for 1900. They're being bought at those prices. Eventually, the market will accept fully those prices, and then probably buyouts will happen. And then the next thing you know, there will be another leg up. So naming sets that are basically out of print, as far as like more booster boxes being printed, especially like Team Up. You know, are people going to be dumping Team Up for $3,000? Like, what exactly is the argument here? I think the better argument, I guess, would be to say that demand can cool, which, to be fair, in the summer, it typically does. You know, we typically see a cooling of demand, right, in summer 2021, right? 2022, everything was cooled in 2022. 2023, summer demand dropped. Jumped up again in the holiday seasons. Demand dropped. Jumped up again in the holiday seasons. So, you know, we might see prices stabilize or drop a little bit over the summer. But what we can also say is in the holiday season, there might be big buyouts. There's going to be a lot more money being injected into the market, because that's what always happens, because the Pokemon Company, they want to print more for especially newer sets. Put more product in people's hands because it's good for the brand. It's good for money, obviously. It's when people spend the most. But all right, conclusion. Across every segment, from vintage to modern to singles to slabs and sealed, we are in a deep and hype-driven boom. Now, there is a hype-driven boom. This is true. While vintage sets like Base and Team Rocket have shown relatively stable or modest growth, modern products have exploded with the growth rates as high at their peak as 300, 400%. Cards that were flat, cards that were more available, and still being printed in, you know, those years. Skyrocketed last year. Again, more collectors entered the hobby. A lot of those are plays, speculative plays, and for cards and slabs, expect more volatility always. Sealed product like 151 and Evolving Skies saw dramatic year-over-year growth spikes, with many more than doubling in price within just 12 months. This is an organic, steady appreciation. This is speculation. Evolving Skies has been doubling like every year since it's come out, basically. It came out $100. Next year it was like 300. Next year it was like 400. Next year it was 700, right? It has jumped quite a bit recently, but again, it doesn't mean that there's going to be a huge crash coming. I think a lot of it is organic, but some of it is speculation. This is true. By comparing growth rates for, again, 2 years is not a huge sample size. We understand that there has been more growth in this year, but there's like 10 times the amount of people, it feels like. So we're leaving out so many factors. We can clearly see this market isn't driven by collector demand or long-term fundamentals. It's driven by hype, momentum chasing, and FOMO. And history has shown, whether it's the .com bubble, or the 2020 Pokemon spike, that parabolic price movements always lead to sharp corrections. Sharp corrections. The higher the growth acceleration, the bigger the risk, and right now that risk is everywhere, especially in modern products. Whether you're holding or considering buying in, this data should serve as a warning. When the music stops, prices don't just slow down, they fall hard. If this is a bubble, a correction could bring better buying opportunities in the future. If this is a bubble, a correction could bring better buying opportunities in the future. Guys, if Fusion Strike drops to $400, I am going all in. I'll tell you that. Let the data guide you. Double hyphen, not the hype. This market has reached a level of irrational growth that history has shown is unsustainable. Don't be the last one holding. Okay, it's a little bit like sensational at the end there. I think there are some valid points. I think you should be careful holding cards and slabs because there's going to be more of them in the future. But with sets like Sword and Shield booster boxes that aren't being printed anymore, I'm not buying it. We haven't ever seen a huge crash in price for these sets. They've only ever gone up. Same with Evolutions. It was cheap for a while, went up, team up. We know the story there. But I don't think we've ever really seen a booster box crash because the basic fundamentals are supply and demand. It's not that complicated. And we have way more people than we ever have before. And by the time a crash happens, hypothetically, it's not going to matter because there's going to be less product than there was before. And that's kind of the thing that I've always thought with Scarlet and Violet. You know, when you think about Pal the Evolved and Paradox Rift and Surging Sparks, Twilight Masquerade, you know, we're by the time a crash happens, more time is going to be passed for those sets, which means we're going to be seeing less reprints or restocks of them. And if a lot of that product gets eaten up between now and then, it may not matter what happens because they were just timed well as far as appreciation goes by being released during the biggest growth spike we've ever had. So there will be plenty of buying opportunities in the future. I just don't think we're going to see massive .com like drops where things dropped 90%. Jumbo cards, it went up a lot, therefore will go down. Yeah, I mean, it was made by AI, 100%. By the way, double hyphen means AI. Yeah, I mean, the argument they're saying it will drop because it's gone up. It's like people have been saying that forever. I do think we'll see some corrections for different products in the market, but not for booster boxes that are out of print. Yeah. Parabolic price movements always lead to sharp corrections. This is very true, but the caveat is that items that have now hit levels of scarcity like Sun and Moon, X and Y, Evolutions does have more supply, are going to be less susceptible when the downturn hits. Yeah, because fewer people own them and there's fewer boxes. The downturn is going to show everyone that sealed boxes are king. Yeah, I agree. While data is important, especially for determining what products you invest into, you also have to incorporate the hype and listen to people. Yeah, you should always be listening to market sentiment because that's what kind of dictates how well a set can do. It is a huge factor in driving the market, obviously. Evolving Skies, Evolutions, one of the best sets ever. It's already more expensive than some older sets. It's starting to creep up, but it shouldn't be in theory. It's an outlier, obviously. So using Evolving Skies as an example for an entire era is doesn't paint a full story. It's a huge outlier. Team Up, obviously, another huge outlier. If I were to compare to stocks, you simply chose a better stock than everyone else. Yeah. I highly doubt Evolving Skies will drop below Evolutions, which is a much worse set just because it's older. Yeah, older doesn't always mean better. It just means it's older, just means it's generally going to be better. But Evolving Skies is an outlier. It's my opinion, again, best set ever made, so it will do well. Rip and Shippers, by the way, huge impact, not considered at all in this article. So much supply is being ripped, gone forever, right? And sets like Evolving Skies, Team Up, Prismatic, like all the top sets are being ripped to levels we've never seen before. Rip and shipping is peaked, which goes back to my point of like Sun and Moon is being ripped as well on rip and ships. By the time a crash theoretically should happen, it may not matter because so much of it, more than before, will just be gone. And so, yeah, rip and shippers keep prices sealed 100%. And if you're an investor and you feel a certain way about rip and shipping, like myself, I don't like rip and shipping. I think it's silly. You can't deny that it's a massive factor in sealed product. Love it or hate it, that is a big driving force. So to say that there's going to be a crash, it's another reason. And then this guy used AI to counter the article. It's just kind of funny. Yeah, ignores steady growth, only focus on hype cards. Pretty interesting. Sealed product is out of print. Author is shocked that these top sets are skyrocketing. It isn't just FOMO. It's a direct result of supply and demand. Yeah, it's that simple. It is literally that simple. And especially in a speculative hobby. Fundamental economic principle, not necessarily a sign of speculative bubble. I agree. Concern that prices are ballooning. It is valid. Doesn't automatically mean a crash is imminent, like the author is claiming. I agree. The correction of 2025. Yeah, why 2025? Why not 2026? I think the reason is because we're in summer and demand is not as high as it was in like February, right? Which is to be expected. And so I think there's a lot more like bear market sentiment right now. Comparison to the dot-com bubble is tenuous, backed by companies. No profits, no assets, no viable business model. Correct. It was like pure smoke and mirrors. 100% drops, basically. 25-year history, global fan base, rally rooted in nostalgia and collectability, in addition to speculation. It is a major factor, speculation, but the underlying asset is fundamentally different. Completely agree. Comparing it to the dot-com bubble literally makes no sense. And so the AI said that this was cherry-picked, contradictory evidence. Conclusion is an unsubstantiated guess, which I tend to agree. Shout out to AI. Yeah, it's just AI nonsense to me. And if you have to think about it in a very simple way, it is supply, it is demand. The good sets outperform sets that are worse. And if you believe in the hobby, you're going to be here for a few years, and you're basically saying that supply will be less in the future and that demand will still be there. Now, we have gone through periods of boom before. The Pokemon Company has done exceptionally well to continue demand. They're capitalizing on it. And so I think newer sets are more at risk, like Prismatic, Distant Rivals, Journey Together, the Black Bull White Flare. They're going to be putting more effort into these sets, the sets that are causing more of that hype. Because if they don't print enough Prismatic, it is really bad for their brand. So you need to keep that in mind. And what we always see is that when demand spikes, a lot more people stick around. And it continues to grow. So, you know, take these articles with a grain of salt, especially ones written by AI, because so many factors are excluded. But there's value in understanding that the hobby is driven on speculation, and try to understand where market sentiment is for cards and slabs, like ungraded cards and sealed. And oftentimes you can make better plays than normal. So what I think will happen, you know, I agree that speculation and demand currently is extremely high, and it's not sustainable, a 300% increase every single year. But I don't know what's going to happen. I just buy sets that are a little bit older and I hold them. And that's really all you need to do. Everything else in between is noise. And, you know, it's important to keep updated with the market, but, you know, the best investors put the boxes in the closet and then they forget about it. You know what I mean? And I've worked very hard to learn how to not rip, because I did that quite a bit. So yeah, guys, take everything with a grain of salt. If there's a crash, that just means it's a buying opportunity for the investors and the collectors alike. So if that happens, great. If it doesn't, we'll see what happens. So yeah, thank you for watching. Bit of a long, ranty one, but I just hate AI. I hate AI. I just think a lot of it is junk, and there's so much nuance that's ignored. It can be useful. I've written a number of work emails using AI that I've edited after, because sometimes it's easy to do, but you know, just be very careful with what you read online and don't necessarily read it as a fact, because at the end of the day, this is somebody's opinion and they're only using 2 years of data to build an argument around us being in a giant speculative bubble that indicates an intense market correction. Just be very careful with what you read. Stick to your plan. Stick to your own insight, and use everything as a data point. So, yeah. Tomorrow, making a video on my best performing products. So I'm kind of excited about that and my key takeaways. I believe that's the video that I'm going to make then. We'll see. But yeah, guys, I think we're on live on Sunday morning. I really enjoyed that last week. And I think a lot of my viewers are from the EU. So it was cool to have you guys in there. And, I'll keep making posts and things of that nature. But if you've made it this far, consider liking the video. It helps out a lot with the algorithm. Drop a comment down below. I want to hear your thoughts. And I will see you very soon in the next one. Goodbye.